Formula One goes to all sorts of places around the world. While there has been expansion into new markets in the last 10 or 15 years, there are the constants on the calendar. The British Grand Prix, the Italian Grand Prix, Belgium, Monaco, Canada, Japan and Hungary? Let's be real, when you think Formula One, Hungary seems to be a bit of an outlier because you think Britain, you think Belgium, you think Monaco, you think all of these other countries that have a very rich racing history. I know that the Hungarians are pretty big into their bikes, but it just seems to be like one of those outlier countries. It's like, oh yeah, Hungary. But it's such a cool track and such a cool location to have a track. And you really wouldn't expect a race to be there when it was first conceived in the 1980s because of... Well, let's have a bit of a history lesson. The Cold War was still on. Tensions had risen sharply in 1983 as East and West almost came to blows. Big, scary, nuclear blows. Basically, what had happened is that the Western militaries under the NATO alliance were doing some exercises under the codename Able Archer, which basically translated to, we're going to pretend that the big kaboom is about to happen and we're going to have a dress rehearsal for that big kaboom. So the simulation involved going all the way from DEFCON 5 all the way up to DEFCON 1, which is the big kaboom. The fact that this involved Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher and Helmut Kohl to add to the realism, as well as referring to B-52 flights as nuclear strikes, the Soviets went on high alert, thinking that this training exercise was a ruse to go to war. But when the exercise ended on the 11th of November, everybody chilled. But this was the second time in a month and a half or so that things had reached a point where a pinprick would have sent it over the edge. On the 26th of September 1983, a Soviet early warning system showed an American Minuteman ICBM had been launched. Then it showed 4 more Minutemen. But thankfully, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov didn't think this was real, and managed to convince his superiors that this was the case. Oh, and this was only 3.5 weeks after Korean Airline 007 was shot down by a Su-15 interceptor. Fun fact, because of that incident, GPS became available for civilians. So as you can probably imagine, this made things go a bit iffy as well, socially. A bit of a anti-Eastern sentiment at the time. In 1984, the Soviets boycotted the Olympics in Los Angeles as the Americans had done for the 1980 Olympics in Moscow. So sport on either side was going to be annoying one side over another. But F1 Supremo Bernie Ecclestone didn't seem fazed by any of this. He was keen for Formula One to expand, and holding a race on the other side of the Iron Curtain seemed like something Formula One could try. So he hopped on a plane and went to Moscow. Now, for those who aren't familiar with the term, the Iron Curtain was basically the border between Finland and Russia in the northeast, and then the border between East and West Germany running down to Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania and Bulgaria, where it runs to the north of Greece, Turkey, that area. There's a map on your screen. Bernie found Soviet Moscow to be grey and depressing, a bit like Coventry, and found that this would not be a suitable place to hold a Formula One Grand Prix. The city nor the country would be able to pull it off. But his wife/girlfriend at the time, Slavica Radic, suggested that the race be held in Yugoslavia. And if you've never heard of that country before, that's because it no longer exists. It's now several countries: Slovenia, North Macedonia, Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Kosovo, I think. Oh, and Montenegro, which used to be Serbia and Montenegro. Back to the racing. Bernie had this friend called Tamas Rohonyi, and my Hungarian is non-existent, so I do apologise, and he was the promoter for the Brazilian Grand Prix for a good length of time. He said to Bernie that Yugoslavia wasn't a good idea as much as Moscow wasn't a good idea, so he suggested Hungary instead. So Bernie said, alright, talk to the authorities for me. Slow negotiations began, and a few months later, in what I think was around mid-1985, Bernie went to Budapest with Rohonyi and immediately fell in love with the place, and the local ministers took him to this park in the centre of Budapest, which I cannot pronounce. I think it says Városliget, and they wanted to use it for a street race, a bit like Monaco or Adelaide later on in the season, or Montjuic in Barcelona that had been run in the past. But the local councillors refused to chop down any trees, so it was back to the drawing board. The minister at the head of all this, a man called János Urban, I think, was a bit miffed that his plan had been shut down like that, so instead decided he was going to build his own racetrack outside the city, and he found this hilly region outside of Budapest near the village of Mogorod. He convinced the local landowners to give him the land by saying Formula 1 was going to make them more money than potatoes would. But what's mad here is that the construction of the Hungaroring began in the October of 1985. The first race was held on the 24th of March 1986. So these were track builders definitely not paid by the hour. The track that was built is known as Monaco with scenery, almost like a tiny Nordschleifer in a way. It's bumpy, twisty and narrow, which made overtaking difficult, if not impossible. But that's not to say it hasn't been without any memorable moments. Piquet overtaking Senna on full opposite lock, Damon Hill sending it on Schumacher to take the lead in 1997, Schumacher swapped strategy the year later, Jenson Button's first win in 2006, and Hamilton sitting on the grid by his Billy in 2021. And over the years it has seen a couple of changes to try and make things a bit better for racing. In 1989 the chicane at what is now Turn 3 was removed, and in 2003 the run to Turn 1 was extended by about 200 metres, with Turn 1 tightened and the second chicane removed to lengthen the straight between turns 11 and 12 to open up another overtaking opportunity. Despite its reputation as a track that often produces boring races, a lot of drivers love it. Verstappen, Hamilton, Schumacher, Alonso and Senna have all been on record as saying that they love the place, but at the same time it's had its criticisms for being too slow and hot, especially since the race is often in a part of the year when the weather in that part of the world is hot and dry. It's also, along with Monza, the circuit that's been in continuous use the longest, if that makes any sense. Now that's a stat. And because of the race in Hungary in 1986, it meant that Formula 1 crossed the Iron Curtain when many other sports didn't particularly want to. The event was an instant hit with over 200,000 people from the Eastern Bloc turning up to see the cars of the time, and there are claims that this may have helped towards the Soviet Union beginning to open up before its dissolution in the early 90s, with Metallica and other bands punctuating the whole thing with that concert in Moscow, and if you've never seen it, it is insane. So then, a look at how F1 took the bold step to the other side of the Iron Curtain. If you've enjoyed this look back at a time when the world was often on a knife edge or just enjoyed the references to fighter jets, then do like the video. And for more stuff like this, get subscribed with the bell on so you never miss out. Massive thanks to the kind folk at Patreon for the support, and if you want to support me at a more personal level, you can do so by following the link in the description, where there's also links to Discord, socials, and the F1 store affiliate link, where if you buy anything from a keyring to a jacket, I get a kickback. Or there's super thanks if you just want to buy me a pint or a Tesco meal deal. So until next time, I've been Millward. Have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.